am both privileged to work for the Holocaust Center and to collaborate with our wonderful ambassadors for change. And I use she, her pronouns. I'm calling in from Seattle, Washington, where both myself and the Holocaust Center are occupying space on the traditional lands of many Coast Salish peoples who have been here since time immemorial. And I see some familiar names in the chat, but if you are less familiar, the Holocaust Center for Humanity teaches lessons from the Holocaust, inspiring students of all ages to confront bigotry and indifference, and to, most importantly, take action. And this event in particular is hosted by Ambassadors for Change, or what we call AFC. And AFC is a year-long cohort for young adults to organize and raise awareness for the Holocaust Center, to inspire change in their peers and in their community, and to help build connections through mission-based social and educational opportunities. Jordan, our AFC president, who you see here on the screen, will be our chat monitor for the night. So if you have any issues or questions for us, logistical things, feel free to shout out Jordan in the chat, and she will try to answer those questions for you. And when it comes time to ask some questions to our guest speaker tonight, we ask that you put your questions in our Q&A feature, and Jordan will get to them there. So if you're unsure where that is, you should see on the bottom of your screen a Q&A button with little talk bubbles, and that's where you'll post your questions for our speaker. And in the similar place at the bottom of the screen, you'll see our chat feature, which is where you can communicate with each other and ask Jordan questions as well there, if you'd like logistical things. Before we introduce our guest speaker, one of our ambassadors, Julia, would like to lead us in a brief reflection together. So hi, Julia.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us and for being here on this cozy, rainy Sunday evening. So before we get started with the rest of the program and hearing from our speaker tonight, we wanted to really ground this conversation in self-reflection. And so right now I wanted to ask, if you feel so inclined, or you have a piece of paper nearby and feel like it might be helpful to write down your answers to these questions, I invite you to do that. Otherwise, you can just reflect quietly, internally. I will be writing down my thoughts as I lead you through this reflection. And again, I just think it's a really helpful tool to use your pen and put it to paper. So the first question I really wanted everyone to think about a little bit here before we get into our talk is, in what ways have you been impacted, large or small, by anti-Semitism in recent media and news online? And I know that is can feel like a heavy place to start, but I think it's really important to think through how this impacts us at a personal and individual level. So there has been a lot in the media and in the news and in the world recently and for many years. So take a moment to just think about how that has landed in your individual life. Okay, and it's okay if you're still writing, if you're bulleting words or writing full sentences, both are perfect, or if you're just thinking in your head, that's great as well. You're welcome to continue doing that as I bring to you the second question. Going a little bit deeper there, can you reflect on how you feel in your body at this moment. So how does it feel to write down those reflections? How does it feel to be here tonight, joining in community to talk about these issues? Any words or feelings that come to mind, write those down. And then the second piece of that question is, how has it felt in your body, in your heart, in those moments when you have experienced anti-Semitism, either online or out in the world? Does it feel differently than you feel right now reflecting on those moments? Does it feel the same? Just take a moment to write a little bit about that. Okay, I hope I'm not cutting off anyone's train of thought, but the last question that I wanted to bring to the group right now is, if any, who is one person in your life who has taught you about Jewish history and traditions, or about your own heritage, whether you're Jewish or not, and how did it feel to learn about those things? How did it feel emotionally? How did it feel in your body? And maybe this is also an opportunity to contrast that feeling with the one that we were just writing about. And as we take a few moments to think through those questions, whether it feels good to write about them, whether it feels challenging, we as a group would really invite you to carry those feelings and those reflections as you listen tonight.
And if you are finishing a thought, go ahead and finish that thought. And then when you're ready, come back to us now, because we would like to explore these ideas a little bit further and talk a little bit more about the topic of disrupting anti-Semitism online. And we are very lucky to have Debbie Lechtman with us today as our special guest speaker. And Debbie is a Jewish, Israeli, and Latina author, educator, and artist based out of Los Angeles, California. And in the past, she has worked as a guide at Costa Rica's only Jewish museum and written for a number of Jewish publications. She has a BS in journalism and a minor in sociology and world religions from Syracuse University, as well as an MFA in creative writing from the University of San Francisco, where she researched the period in Jewish history between 1945 and 1948 for her thesis. She currently shares her knowledge and her research on Jewish history on her Instagram account at Roots Medals is the tag. And this is where she's fostered a learning community of over 53,000 followers. You might be familiar with Debbie from Instagram, but if not, let's all welcome Debbie. And today she'll be speaking a little bit about confronting anti-Semitism and as well as being an ally to Jewish communities if anti-Semitism is not something you experience directly. So everyone, please welcome Debbie.
Hi, first I want to apologize. It is so dark in here and no matter what I do, it just keeps getting darker. So I'm so sorry. I was not expecting this, but whatever. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. When I was first approached about this, we first talked about it, we kind of discussed like what we could possibly talk about because Jewish history and the topic of like anti-Semitism is so extensive, and I mean, you obviously can't boil it down to a single talk or seminar or whatever. But what I felt was that you guys really wanted to talk about how we can stand with the Jewish community. And obviously, that conversation is going to be a little bit different if I'm talking to Jews or non-Jewish people. I think that there's things that overlap, but ultimately, it's two different audiences. And I don't really know what the demographics of this chat are, this, talk. But I do think that there's some like general guidelines, I would say, as to what we can do so that we as Jews can feel safer and non-Jews can help us feel safer. And I think a big one is obviously, and I always preach this, but education. I think that we really live in a time where we want like easy answers to things, but the problem is that anti-Semitism is very, very complicated. It's very sneaky, it's very insidious, and it mutates, it changes. And we can't really learn how to catch it if we don't know what's at the core of it, if we don't know what the core conspiracies and tropes and euphemisms are. So I always say that two things are number one when people want to stand with Jews or learn more about anti-Semitism or whatever. The first one is learn who Jews actually are. And the second one is learn the anti-Semitic tropes, conspiracies, and euphemisms. Something I've noticed is a lot of people talk about Jews, but not a lot of people know who Jews are or platform Jews. It's mostly people talking about Jews. And the thing is that we are such a small population. We're about 2.5% of the American population, 0.2% of the world population. And so like our narrative about who we are has really been taken away from us, like by, to compare 31% of the world is Christian and 24%, I believe, of the world is Muslim. So we are so small, and yet we're so talked about. And I think it's really important to understand why. And in looking into those things, you begin to understand how anti-Semitism has become it's really the foundation of so many, bigger things like white supremacy, because it goes so far back. And so, yeah, number one, I always say, learn about Jews from Jews. Learn about anti-Semitic tropes, conspiracies, and all that. I also think that, let me look at my notes real quick before I forget. A lot of people get hung up on this whole, listen to Jews or whatever. And what they do is they don't actually listen to the Jewish community. They listen to a group of fringe Jews. But there's going to be fringe members in any community. And I mean, the Jewish community is known for disagreeing, but there are certain things that we collectively generally agree on. And so I would always, if the Jewish community as a whole is saying something, if we're saying so-and-so is harmful, then pay attention to that and don't pay attention to the random Jewish person who's validating your views, because I see that so much with activism, is people who think they're standing with Jews, but they're just only uplifting Jews that they agree with, or Jews that are validating their perspective. So super important to listen to what the community is saying. And I think that a big example of that is, I don't know how many people are familiar with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism, but essentially it's a non-legally binding definition of anti-Semitism that pretty much the entirety of the mainstream, quote unquote, Jewish world has accepted and adopted. It's been adopted by, I think, 37 countries. 865 entities, meaning different organizations and whatever. So there's stuff like that, right? So like the majority of the community is saying something. Listen to that. Don't listen to the fringe few that will validate what you're saying. I feel like activism and allyship especially are about questioning your views, questioning your biases, because I promise you have them. I think that we all do. So that's always super important. When another thing we see a lot is when people are called out for anti-Semitism, they get defensive or they say, well, so-and-so Jewish friend said this. Instead of taking that approach, I feel like we need to approach it how you would approach being accused of any other sort of bigotry. You should reflect, you should challenge your, what you said or what you think. Instead of getting defensive. That's not helpful. That you can always do better. We all make mistakes and that's okay, but like we have to be able to reflect and see where we're wrong. Like I said, anti-Semitism is so old. It's the foundation of so much. It's in our language, it's in our literature, it's in our media, it's in our institutions, and we don't even think about it because it's just so deeply ingrained. So to reiterate, everyone has biases. As Jews, I feel like we all have some level of internalized anti-Semitism that we also have to contend with. I've found myself doing it all the time. And I mean, I've spent so many hours of research and writing on Jewish history and anti-Semitism, and I still catch myself doing things where I'm like, hey, like, where's this idea coming from? And how can I challenge it? And how can I do better, not just for myself, but for the Jewish community as a whole. So we got those three things. I also really want to emphasize that, especially recently with the whole Kanye West fiasco that we're seeing, I really want to emphasize that calling out anti-Semitism is not about calling out the anti-Semitism of the guy you hate. That's so easy. It's so easy to say that guy's an anti-Semite. I don't like that guy. It's so much harder to call out the anti-Semitism from the people that you love, from your side of the political aisle, from your family, from your friends. But I think that's the most important, because that's the only way we actually really disrupt it. If we are just calling out our opponent, it's placing Jews, it's almost like tokenizing Jews. Like you're just using our oppression, our pain, our trauma to, play gotcha with the other guy. And that, that's not helpful. And it's, personally, I can say it's been really traumatizing to see it all play out like this. In the media and on social media. It's almost like a weird Twilight Zone feeling when you've seen someone perpetuate anti-Semitic stereotypes and tropes to such a public audience, and then all of a sudden they're saying, well, what Kanye said was wrong and there's no excuse for anti-Semitism, and you're just sitting there and you're like, but I saw what you said the other day. Like that, you're not helping. You are, in fact, adding to the problem because you're presenting yourself in a certain way and basically absolving yourself of anything harmful that you might have said or will say in the future. And when people say, hey, you're being anti-Semitic, you're going to say, well, I called out Kanye. And that's, again, not helpful. That just honestly is traumatizing and damaging for your Jewish friends and family. So let's not do that either. Finally, I think out of like my main points here, I think that it's very, very important to give the Jewish community the mic when we're talking about anti-Semitism. It seems that everyone has a lot to say. but very few of these people are actually letting us tell it. And the thing is that this spike that we're seeing in anti-Semitism is extremely concerning to me. Like, I think for the first time in my life, I can say that I'm like actually legitimately scared for my physical safety, just walking down the street with a Star of David on. But all of these atrocities and horrible things that have happened to Jews in the past are well within living memory. This is like a trauma that is still extremely fresh, and it's not just the Holocaust, it's 2,000 years leading up to the Holocaust. There's been a massive ethnic cleansing, genocidal violence, all this stuff after the Holocaust. We haven't even had the time to process it. And it's so, I can't think of a better word than traumatizing to see all this hoopla play out on social media, especially. But we're not given the mic. We're just here watching, and everyone's talking about how that guy's anti-Semitism is so wrong. But you're saying, well, you were just being anti-Semitic the other day, but you can't even say that because we're not being given the mic, we're being spoken over. So absolutely, please listen to the Jewish community as a community, amplify the Jewish community again as a community, not just the random Jew that happens to agree with you. Challenge your biases, challenge your family, your friends, the people on your political side, regardless of where your politics are. I promise you there's anti-Semitism there. And one thing specifically pertaining to the internet, Antisemitism Online, is if you make, I'm really big on this one, but if you make any sort of post in solidarity with Jews or any sort of post about anti-Semitism, please moderate the comment section, because the comment section is where some of the worst anti-Semitism actually spreads. For example, the other day, I think it was yesterday actually, the official United Nations Instagram account made a post basically saying Holocaust denial is wrong, period, blah, blah, blah. Regardless of the fact that they used to have a Secretary General who was actually an SS officer, regardless of that, if you look at the comment section, it was just the most horrific thing you will ever see. But something that I noticed, and it's because I don't usually leave comments because I got better things to do than argue with people on the internet, but I left a comment because I just thought the audacity was a little too much for an institution with a former Nazi Secretary General to say that, who they've never apologized for. So I left a comment basically saying, well, this is rich coming from you guys. And that's not how I said it, but basically that was the gist. And whatever, there's people commenting on my comment, and someone in my comment was saying Holocaust denying stuff. And someone else came in and was like, I've never doubted that the Holocaust happened, but what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And so I'm like, in this post that was specifically made to supposedly stand in solidarity with Jews, you are allowing this vile anti-Semitism to spread, and people are falling for it. And I'm seeing it right here. And I have so many examples of that. But I really, especially if you have a large platform, that to me is so, so important. I feel like showing solidarity for a group is not just showing up once and saying, I support you. It's actually doing the work. And in terms of online, part of that work includes moderating your comment section. Every single anti-Semitism post you're going to see is going to have vile anti-Semitism in the comment section. And that's really dangerous. That's where it spreads. It doesn't spread out in the open like that usually. course, we're reaching a point where obviously that's happening, but generally it's always been very subtle, coded in euphemisms and dog whistles and all this. And so you can't say that you're trying to disrupt it and then don't actually do any of the work to disrupt it, even on your page. So I think that's like the last thing I wanted to say specifically on how to handle this online. Unfortunately, I, as a creator online, a Jewish creator who talks about these topics, I feel that the, what's it called? The whole reporting comments or reporting posts or whatever, it's doesn't really work. It needs a lot of, it's not great. You can report things all day, they won't take it down. And that's obviously on like Meta and Twitter and all these corporations that I don't really have any control over. But again, something that we do have control over is the type of things that we allow in our communities, whether that is an online community or in real life. So if you, as a little just individual person, want to stand with Jews, then you got to make sure that your space is a safe space for Jews online or in real life. Yeah, I think that's pretty much my spiel on that. I don't know if anyone has any specific questions pertaining to either being an ally, how to handle things online, or even if you're a Jew, like if you have any questions about how to handle these things, I would love to answer them.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi.
Thank you so much. I just want to introduce myself really quickly. My name is Sabrina Bonaparte. I am part of the AFC cohort for this year. For visual description, I'm a white female and I have shoulder length black hair. I also have really cool earrings on that you can't see because my background's blurring it out, but they look like just kind of blue slabs, and I'm wearing red lipstick. I'm calling in from Monroe, Washington, which is currently covered in snow, and that is on Skykomish and Still-Squamish land. And my pronouns are she, her. So Debbie, I wanted to engage with you and ask a few questions that we have. To start with, what are your thoughts on turning off comment sections on your social media posts or on social media posts in general?
So here's how I see it. Someone once told me, I was dealing with one of the million harassment campaigns I've dealt with, and someone once told me, your online space is your house. You make up the rules in your house. If people want to act up and don't want to follow your rules, they can go elsewhere on the internet. The internet is huge, blah, blah, blah. I think ultimately we have to remember that every single person that's posting is just a person. Obviously, it's different if it's an organization like the United Nations, like I said. But as far as individuals go, I feel like if things are getting out of hand, it's better to close the comment section than to allow this vile anti-Semitism to spread. Oftentimes what we see is that people are spreading anti-Semitism under the guise of like, oh, I'm just questioning things, or like, what, you don't want people to, to ask questions, to you know what I mean? Like they kind of frame it like that, like you're silencing them. And so they will say that whether you close the comment section or not. I think ultimately your responsibility as a person in your space is to make sure the space is safe for everyone. And if it's getting out of hand and it's just something you personally can't handle, I would much rather someone close the comment section than allow that vile, nonsense to go around. It's obviously different if it's the United Nations or, an official account for whoever. That's my personal opinion on it. I've had to close comment sections, and I will do it every time if it's costing me, my mental health. I can only do so much. So.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great. Another question. How can I craft useful messages that I can post on my own social media that help my non-Jewish friends understand more about my culture and my life and why I deserve respect and protection?
I think as far as like the last part of the question, that makes me sad because, you know, we're all, Jewish or not, we're all human beings deserving of respect and protection. I think that anti-Semitism is just so old and deeply ingrained that it dehumanizes us, even if even if people don't consciously think that they're dehumanizing us, they probably are in subconscious ways. If you are a Jewish person and you're trying to communicate this with, your audience, your friends, your followers, whatever, I would say the first thing to do is, before you post anything, is take care of yourself. It's really, really hard being a Jewish person on the internet. It's especially hard being a Jewish creator on the internet. I think that when people ask me about, I know this person wasn't necessarily asking about like starting like an activist account, but when people ask me how they can get started or what they can do, what they should do, I always say, play up your strengths. Like for me personally, I'm really good at getting like these really giant subjects and like boiling it down to like several points. I think that that's my strength. It's obviously not going to be everyone else's strength, and that's fine. But also, again, if you're Jewish and you're posting about this stuff, just take care of your mental health first. And if you feel like you're in a place where you can do that, then that's great. But again, make sure you are taking care of yourself. It really worries me to hear stuff like that because I know how they feel. And for me, it's obviously different because at this point, this is my career. But yeah, you deserve protection and respect and safety because you're a human being, period. But if you do want to post something, think about what you're good at and think about what you enjoy and how can you put that in such a format. Not everyone has to be like me. Not everyone has to make the same kinds of posts that I make.
Thank you. Actually, Debbie, I was going to say, I think you're being too modest. One thing that I've done is shared your posts, obviously giving you credit for it, but I think that Debbie has a lot of really good posts on education about Jewish history, who Jewish people are, who they are not, all sorts of things like that. And if you find one that resonates with you, you should definitely share it because Debbie's really great at that. She's just being modest right now.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I do I really mean this though. Like, you don't have to be an activist. You don't have to post about this stuff. If you're Jewish, you don't have to beg people for respect and safety. You have a right to that just by virtue of being human. And it's not your job or responsibility to educate people. There's some of us out here that are doing it because we want to. But if you don't want to, that's fine. If you want to do it, think about how you can do it in a way that resonates with you. If you want to share my posts, that's great too. But definitely not a requirement. But yeah.
Thank you. Another question, how can we call out more subtle forms of anti-Semitism? Is it different than how we call out more blatant and obvious ones?
Yeah, so the way I think of this is the blatant, obvious anti-Semitism is the tip of the iceberg. And everything underwater is all like the more subtle forms of it that lead up to a point where we've got people just blatantly saying stuff. And how do we deal with the stuff under the water? I think we deal with that with education. I feel like there's a general, almost like, I'm trying to think of the right word, but there's like a general guideline, I guess, for anti-Semitic tropes, because it's the same tropes. They just kind of like evolve to adapt to any given society or medium. Like obviously 2000 years ago, the internet didn't exist. but like something, for example, the way that anti-Semitism was spread with the invention of the printing press really changed things. And so it's like same thing right now with social media. It's spreading at a speed and a rate that we can't even begin to comprehend, but it's the same tropes, it's the same conspiracies, and it's the same stereotypes. So I feel like once people really get like a baseline understanding of what these tropes are, and they can start to like imagine how that might, change given any particular society or any particular medium, then that's how you begin to understand it. I don't know if that answer makes sense, but I think at the very core is understand these tropes and conspiracies and stereotypes.
Thank you. Another question, how might you advise a parent to encourage and prepare Jewish youth to feel supported on social media?
Oof. Obviously I'm not a parent. I'm a dog parent, so that's different. And I don't know, like I really feel for you. I don't have that experience yet. I would encourage my kid to find community and find spaces where they feel safe and appreciated and loved, online and offline. For me personally, obviously, like I'm older than these kids, but for me, it's been very, very healing to find people on social media that I share commonalities with, people that make me feel like I'm in community with them, whether they're Jewish or not. And so I would advise kids, instead of, like engaging with people who have no desire to learn or not be anti-Semitic, or they're just being antagonizing on social media, connect with people who are not like that. Connect with people that you bond with. Connect with people that make you feel safe. I feel like a lot of times we waste time arguing with people on social media, and that just never goes anywhere. If someone wants to argue, they're going to argue. If someone doesn't want to learn, they're not going to learn. So yeah, definitely go where you feel safe. Don't waste your time with people who are just wasting your time. That's the best I got. I'm obviously not a parent, so I feel like I probably shouldn't be like dishing out parenting advice, but that's what I would say.
Thank you. Another question, what have you found to be especially helpful or impactful when engaging non-Jewish people in this important conversation? Or do you mostly educate fellow Jewish people?
I do want to say that the majority of people that follow me are Jewish, but I get messages from people all the time who are not Jewish, who are like, hey, you changed my mind on this, you made me realize how like deeply ingrained this was in me on that. And I think for me, the way that I approach it personally is through historical context. Obviously, not everyone's going to have that background, but like I can say like so-and-so is harmful because historically so-and-so happened when this happened. And I feel just presenting people with facts like that, just facts that are very corroborated and backed up. I have very like strict guidelines for myself in terms of sources. You can't dispute that. And so it's like, how do you fight propaganda, including anti-Semitic propaganda? You fight it by sharing the truth. And some people are gonna respond to it and some people are not. And I can't worry about the people that are not gonna respond to it, because then I'd be worrying all day. But yeah, to me, that's my thing. I'm just gonna tell you what really happened, and I'm gonna have really strict source parameters for myself so that I am well equipped to handle this conversation.
That's great, thanks. Another question. You mentioned that you think it's important to call out the people close to you and ourselves even, but how do we disrupt national voices of anti-Semitism, like politicians, for example? And how would that approach be different?
Yeah. in terms of politicians, I think that if you are part of a political movement, you should begin with cleaning house instead of calling out the anti-Semitism of the other, which is important. You should also look into your own movement, to your own groups, and like, what are we doing here? Are we perpetuating harmful stereotypes? Are we doing so and so? Like, I feel like there's always ways to look inward. It doesn't necessarily have to be with your family. It can be like, I don't know, if someone's like running for mayor and they're saying anti-Semitic things, even if they're on your side of the political aisle, you should hold them to better standards. So yeah, I mean, it's a big topic, right? Like, if you feel like I'm just a little guy, how am I going to get so and so politician to listen to me? But politicians are working for you, and you demand what you deserve, right? And I don't know. I would begin by, I've seen like politicians do it. Like, I've seen, for example, Congress members on both sides call out the anti-Semitism of fellow people on their side of the political aisle, and I always very much appreciate that, because I think that's very important. I think that's a lot harder to do than calling out your enemy, but I think it's a lot more important, because, you know, if you want to be in an inclusive space that makes you feel safe, then that's what you should do. And same for any other sort of bigotry.
That's great, thanks. Another question. How do you take care of yourself when things happen on your own page? Any specific strategies that have worked for you?
Yeah, so you know, I'm only human, and sometimes it gets to me a lot worse than others. I recently had a situation which was pretty traumatizing. But I always go back to like whatever this person said. My Instagram account is my house. If you don't like the rules of my house, you can go elsewhere on the internet. The internet is huge. Have fun. I have boundaries for what I will and won't put up with. I have really learned not to engage with people who are not interested in engaging, because that's just literally a waste of my energy. And yeah, I mean, like, strict boundaries, I think, are everything, you know, like, once people start saying things like, it's so taxing if I have to argue with someone who's just arguing for the sake of arguing. So yeah, as far as, you know, how to take care of my mental health, it's a work in progress. Sometimes I'm better at it than others, but you know, this is a job for me, so I look at it like a job, and I'm like, okay, well, these are the guidelines of what is acceptable in my workspace and what is not, and that's it.
Thank you for that. Another question. I know the online gaming communities have had problems with anti-Semitism, especially. Do you have any experience with the online gaming platforms and how to game safely as a Jewish person?
I unfortunately do not. I'm not in that world at all. I'm sorry.
That is okay. You don't have to know everything, Debbie. You know most things.
I have no idea how any of that works. So.
That's good.
Like, people make money playing video games. I'm like, how?
Okay. Another question. This one comes from Joan. Joan says, I am not on Instagram, but I am wondering if you ever ask people who have posted anti-Semitic comments why they have these beliefs and then try to correct their misconceptions.
At this point, I don't. My account is way too big for me to do that. But again, you know, I'm just one person trying to run this thing while, you know, doing my work, trying to make a living. So no, I don't at this point. I will direct them to resources if they're interested. I have a post on like basically everything under the sun at this point. So I definitely will be like, hey, well, if you want to learn more about why that is incorrect, check out this post or whatever. But as far as like having like one-on-one conversations, like, why do you think this and blah, blah, like I can't, I just physically can't do it. I did it a lot more earlier on, and I've gotten better at like being able to tell which people are like genuinely trying to have a discussion with me and which people are just you're talking to a brick wall, because that's another thing. Yeah.
I have so many good questions flying in the chat here. Debbie, I think you're going to like this one. Is there any way to help Debbie with her account, typing up posts, managing comments, or something like that?
I'm actually, so that's really nice of you to ask. I am looking next year to kind of like expand a little bit and have more people involved, whether that includes like hiring people or whatever. At the moment, I just don't have the capacity to like set any of that up because I have like a lot of things going on before the end of the year. But I did realize recently that I can't do this all by myself, and it's a little much. And so I do have plans to like expand operations soon.
Awesome. Well, that very nice question came from Eliza. So Eliza, if you are still listening, keep in touch with Debbie.
Yes, keep in touch. I'm waiting until like, you know, everything I got until the end of the year to like sort of make an announcement and be like, okay, someone come on the team. But yeah.
Another question, where does your Instagram name Roots Metals come from?
That's funny. So my account actually originally started as a jewelry account. It was right after grad school, and I felt like I needed a little break from things, and so I started selling jewelry on the account. It's called Roots Metals because I was on a trip to India with my sister, and I was like looking at all these different cultures, and because India, you know, has so many different cultures in one place, and so I was kind of like seeing it as an outsider, and I realized like, oh, I've like never looked at my own cultures through these eyes. And so I was like, what would happen if I did that? And so like that was sort of like the whole like inspiration, like, oh, like my roots and metals, because I work with metal. And then it kind of like transformed into this whole other thing, totally not on purpose. I never intended to do any of this work online. Though I am grateful that I took that route. But now I'm like attached to the name. So yeah, like I don't know.
It is a great name, and it's memorable too.
Yeah. Like people call me Roots in real life, and I'm like, I don't know.
Love it. A question from Marcy. Hi, Debbie. Thank you for your insights. My query is how to handle anti-Semitic comments and or actions from other marginalized groups. It is rather, quote, easy to take on the white supremacist, the neo-Nazi, the Klan types. Their hate is easier to grasp. But if, for example, a Muslim person or a Black person says or acts with anti-Semitic tropes, I want to take on and try to educate these folks, but also I want to add to their demonization and potential harm that they also face. Please advise and thank you.
That's such a good question, and it's something that I grapple with a lot. I recently had a meeting with the big Jewish organization, and we kind of had that discussion, like how do we tackle these topics that are very sensitive in, you know, in a helpful way that doesn't put anyone in danger, doesn't whatever, you know. It's tricky. These are like touchy subjects, but the truth of the matter is that anti-Semitism, just like it spans, you know, like the political spectrum, because it predates politics as we know them today. It also predates so many other things, and so it spans across the globe. It spans so many cultures. So it's there. It's going to be there, and it's hard also because a way that anti-Semitism functions within white supremacy specifically is that it creates like this divide between Jews and other marginalized groups. And so I think something that's been very helpful for me personally is getting people to see that side of it, that it's a very specific, intentional dividing between Jews and other groups that's coming from white supremacy, and that's targeting both Jews and other marginalized groups to find like animosity with each other. That is kind of like the conversation that I have. That said, anti-Semitism also goes beyond the scope of white supremacy, and it's present in other circles that are not white supremacist circles. And that's another thing that's important to understand. But I think if we begin to understand that in terms of white supremacy, at least, we have a common oppressor, then we can start doing that like inter-community dialogue.
Thank you. It's great. Another question. This one I know is very complex, so if you'd rather direct us to resources than answer this live, please feel free to do so. But Sarah is wondering, what thoughts or advice do you have about determining whether hateful sentiment towards Israel is anti-Semitic?
Here's what I think. I think that if people can understand, for example, and this is just an example, I could give you 20 different examples. If people can understand that critiques of, for example, a Muslim state can delve into Islamophobia if you're partaking in stereotypes and just saying bigoted things about Islam or Muslims, like if you can understand that, then you can understand how a similar thing can happen with Israel. Ultimately, Israel as a nation state is just as deserving of criticism as any other country. But if this criticism is actually like trafficking in anti-Semitic tropes, if you see, I don't know, a cartoon depicting an Israeli politician depicted as like, you know, how you depict anti-Semitic cartoons, then that's not criticism. You are basically trafficking in anti-Semitism under the guise of criticism of Israel. And again, once you understand what the tropes are, you can be like, okay, well, is this actual critique of a policy, something the politician said, something that Israel is like objectively doing, or is this just a new way to transmit this trope, if that makes sense? The other one that's really tricky to talk about is the criticism of double standards, because people don't really seem to understand the difference between a double standard and whataboutism. But basically, a double standard is a standard that is applied differently to one group versus the rest. And so if there is a critique that's being applied to Israel that is not being applied to other countries that are doing the same thing or whatever, then you have to think, well, why are we hyper focusing on this? So that one's a little bit trickier, I think, but I definitely like the tropes. Like if you are engaging in tropes, if you're engaging in anti-Semitic conspiracies, even if you say it's about Israel, it's anti-Semitic, period. If you want to critique Israel, please go ahead. I do it all the time. But actually critique Israel, critique policies, critique what this politician said, critique what they just did, but don't engage in anti-Semitic tropes to do so.
Great answer. Thank you for that, Debbie. Your namesake, Debbie, would like to know, how does one identify fake account posters on social media?
Oof, I don't know if they mean necessarily just like trolls, or I don't know. Well, like I have like a massive group chat with other Jewish creators where we literally just send each other accounts to block. And you get pretty good at it. You know, if it's an account with like 0 followers and 0 posts, but they're following 3 people, and I'm one of those people, I'm like, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's what they mean.
Debbie clarified ones that use fake account names. Probably similar to what you're talking about. They have like 3 followers and they all seem like
it's usually stuff like that. And I honestly think about this all the time because I've blocked so many people because their accounts just look kind of off to me. And I'm always like, what if I blocked someone that was like just a legitimate person? Oh well. But yeah, I mean, to me, like obviously my safety goes first, and if I'm feeling this is suspicious, then I'm not going to test it. but yeah, it's generally newer accounts or accounts that like have no posts or like don't follow anyone or follow like way too many people, but no one follows them. Like it's just stuff like that. Just doesn't look like a real person.
Great, thank you. I wanted to, first of all, thank you for the rapid fire questions, Debbie. Much appreciated for you answering all of those. I think we got to pretty much everyone's, but if we didn't get to your questions, we will try to follow up, or you can ask us some other way and we'll try to get you answers if you have burning questions at the moment. I wanted to pass it over to my colleague, Julia, who actually has some good experience and some insight on how to help kids with online, posting online and feeling safe. So Julia, I wanted to pass back over to you.
Thanks. And thank you so much, Debbie. That was really fun to listen to. I hesitate to use that word when we're talking about anti-Semitism, but it's empowering to hear advice and perspectives from experts in the field. So I just wanted to touch on the question that came in from someone, I'm forgetting who it was, about being a parent and having children online. I will clarify, I'm also not a parent, but I worked in the education department of Holocaust Museum LA for about 2.5 years and specifically worked with a lot of our youth programs. So our internship programs and our ed programs that focused on middle school and high school education. So when that question came up, it felt like an important one for me to address because I know, or to be addressed, because I know that there's a lot of worry in that space. And, you know, I experienced a lot of parents coming to me and to our education staff with the same question and the same concern and fear about having a young adult Jewish person maybe entering the internet space for the first time in their lives. Similar concerns to entering a college campus for the first time, or even a high school campus, where you might feel like you have no idea what they're going to experience, but you've seen what's happening in the news. You yourself have experienced anti-Semitism online. So I recognize that it can be a really scary space to be in. And I just want to, first of all, acknowledge that feeling of fear and that it's understandable and valid, and just share a few of the things that come to my mind, having kind of taught in that space before. The first, I really liked what Debbie was saying about your platform is your house, and just reminding your kid that the internet is a really large space and they are in control of what part of that space they occupy and who occupies the part of the space that they're in control of. So if they have a social media platform or account, they are empowered to block people like you were describing, Debbie. They are empowered to turn off their comments, and just reminding them of that, turning the power over to them rather than telling them exactly what to do, just reminding them that if they're feeling uncomfortable, they are empowered in that space to take whatever action will make them feel comfortable. Making it clear that they can talk to you about these things, making it a space that's safe to talk about with you. So if you're feeling like it's like a really awkward or strange space to navigate, you don't need to have all of the answers as a parent. I don't think anybody expects you to. And that was just something that a lot of parents expressed to me. So just making sure that you don't need to know everything about the internet. You don't need to know everything about anti-Semitism or about anti-Jewish hate on the internet to be able to talk to your kid about it. Holocaust museums are incredible resources. This is not just a pitch for the Seattle Museum, although it is an incredible resource. There are museums in almost every major city in the United States and in most major cities around the world. And so if you travel, stop into those museums. If you're curious about resources outside of Seattle, go on the websites of Holocaust Museum LA, the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City, the museum in Washington, DC. They have such a rich offering of resources that may make your child feel empowered to combat anti-Semitism online. And then the last really big thing, which kind of, I think, goes back into everything we've been talking about here, is to lean on your resources, whether that be your friends and community or the things that you find on the internet. Obviously, not all things are created equal on the internet. And so teaching your child, the students that you might work with, or the young people in your life, again, that they're empowered to fact check everything, talking about what resources may or may not feel trustworthy to them and to you, making sure that they're aware that some things on the internet are not true and real, and that some things are, and talking about how to navigate the space between the two can be a really, really strong way to empower them, so that when they see something that maybe makes their eyebrows furrow, or that that brings doubt into their lives, they know where to turn, whether that be a trusted online newspaper or a blog like Rooted Metals. You know, there are places on the internet to fact check. There are places on the internet where if they see something and they're confused, or they're hurt, or they don't know how to respond and they want to interject, there are places where they can go, where the information can be trusted and can be believed. So that's just a few things that kind of I jotted down and came to mind when we're talking about kind of empowering teens and empowering young people to utilize the web. I hope that helps somebody out there.
Thank you much for adding that, Julia. I'm Lauren. I'm also a member of AFC this year. I'm also calling in from Seattle, Washington, and my pronouns are she, her. This has been an insightful and thought-provoking conversation, and I hope you all have learned something, big or small, from this discussion on disrupting anti-Semitism online. Thank you so much again to our speaker, Debbie, as well as to our audience for your participation. We do apologize if we were not able to answer your question today. If you want to learn more or submit your questions for Debbie to answer directly, you can find her on Instagram at rootsmetals, or visit her website at rootsmetals.com. We'll put these links, as well as info about Debbie's new book and jewelry line, into the chat. Debbie, are there any upcoming projects our audience should know about, or ways they can continue to follow and support your work?
Yes.
It looks like Devonshire is holding up your book.
It seems to be blurred.
I've got a lot of books on the screen.
So, thanks you guys. So yeah, I have my book. You can buy it on Amazon, or you can also buy it off Barnes and Noble, or you can order it from your favorite bookstore. It's called The Witches of Escazú and Other Jewish Fairy Tales, and it's basically a book about Jewish fairy tales, because believe it or not, there's a lot of anti-Semitism that goes into kind of like the regular fairy tales that we're used to. And so I kind of like wanted to do something for the Jewish community that didn't have all these tropes and stereotypes. So there's that. I have a new collection of jewelry and merch and home decor and paintings coming out next Sunday at 12 p.m. PST. You can find that on my website, rootsmetals.com. I also have a podcast with my friend. It's called Do You Want to Talk? I don't know if I can say the word here, so I'm just bleeping myself out. But yeah, we've had a lot of really great discussions on the podcast about a bunch of different issues. Our last one, we had an interview with a Jew whose family fled Iran, so it's like very relevant to everything that's going on. I'm trying to think if I've got anything else going on. I will be at a festival in the UK, but I don't think anyone here is from the UK. So yeah, that's what I got going on right now.
Very cool. Well, I hope everyone has a chance to check that out, and best of luck with your upcoming launch next week.
Thank you so much.
As Devonshire mentioned at the beginning of this event, Ambassadors for Change is a year-long cohort for young professionals to raise awareness for the Holocaust Center, inspire change in our community, and help build connections through mission-based social and educational opportunities such as this one. If you're interested in joining our cohort, the application for 2023 will be open on December 20th. You can learn more and submit your application online via Google form posted on the webpage at holocaustcenterseattle.org/ambassadors. The Holocaust Center for Humanity and Ambassadors for Change rely on donations for all that we do. If you like our work and want to support us, please consider donating by going to holocaustcenterseattle.org/donate now. And you can stay up to date on future AFC events and the Holocaust Center by going to holocaustcenterseattle.org/ambassadors. Finally, to close out our program tonight, we have just a few more questions for you all to think about, or feel free to send your thoughts to us in the chat and we'll share out on your behalf. 1, if you are ever the target of anti-Semitism online, what resources have you found to be helpful when seeking support? And if you are not the target of anti-Semitism online, what are some resources you found helpful to be a better ally for those who are? We hope you have a great rest of your weekend, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us.
We'll leave the webinar open for some space for you all to share some resources with each other in the chat. If you have nothing to share and aren't interested in what we share, feel free to leave us and go enjoy the rest of your night. Debbie, thanks so much for being here. And I'll keep it open until a little bit closer to 6, so you guys can share and further the conversation if you'd like to in the chat for a few minutes.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm gonna step out, but yeah, I hope this was helpful. And you guys, if you guys have any questions, you can head on over to my Instagram, and I try my best to answer all messages. So
Thank you, Debbie. Much appreciated. Have a great night.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Thank you
Bye.
everyone for being
good
here.
night.
If you aren't sticking around to look for resources, we also have a feedback form link in the chat if you want to share your thoughts about our program tonight. Constructive criticism is welcome. We would love your thoughts to help improve future AFC events. So be sure to follow that link, and we'll send you that form in an email as well as any resources that we get maybe after folks leave.